This isn't just a motivational phrase. It's a quiet inner revolution, a total recalibration of the mind's foundation. It's the beginning of a shift so deep, so personal, that it changes the very mechanics of how you move through the world. Old limiting patterns of thought dissolve, and in their place emerges a new cognitive framework, powerful, deliberate, and transformational. When that shift occurs, you start to walk differently, speak with more conviction, think more clearly, act with purpose. No longer do you navigate life hoping things go well by luck or accident. You begin living with a profound understanding. The assumptions you carry in your mind are not just thoughts. They are architects of your reality. And the tragedy is, most people never grasp this until it's too late. Pause for a moment. Take this in fully. Because the way you assume things will unfold is often exactly how they do. Not because of superstition, but because focus is everything. Your most dominant thoughts act as magnets, pulling your reality into alignment with what your mind believes is true. They influence how you respond, how you advance or retreat, how you speak under pressure, and whether you persist through storms or abandon ship mid-journey. So ask yourself, what would happen if, from this moment on, you started with a single assumption: everything is working in my favor? Not only when life is smooth or validating, but even during silence, confusion, and setbacks. How different would your life become if you truly lived as though the result was already secure, as though every door was already open, and your only job was to walk through? This isn't wishful optimism, it's psychological re-engineering, a mental strategy used by the greatest minds in history to rise beyond ridicule, beyond failure, and beyond fear. When Henry Ford imagined the automobile, the world laughed. He didn't argue, he built. He moved before permission, acted before validation, and trusted his vision as though it had already arrived. Thomas Edison wasn't counting failures. Whether it was his 100th attempt or 10,000th, he continued, not because he had proof, but because he had an unshakable assumption. Success was inevitable. He didn't need to see light with his eyes because he had already seen it in his mind. And when you embody that same kind of certainty, when your belief becomes action, you begin reshaping your world around that assumption. Charles Schwab didn't operate from fear, he functioned from belief. A belief so strong it became infectious, lifting the standards of everyone around him. Andrew Carnegie didn't waste energy wondering, what if this fails? He walked as if the outcome was already written. That kind of energy builds careers, legacies, and ripples across generations. So here's the honest question. Why not you? Why not now? You've spent too much time doubting, hesitating, overanalyzing, tethered to old stories rooted in fear. You've postponed. You've waited for clarity, for timing, for signs. But here's the truth. That moment never arrives until you decide to live like it already has. It's time to upgrade your entire internal operating system. Shift from being someone who reacts emotionally, waiting for proof before committing, to someone who acts with invisible certainty, leading from faith rather than fear. Because here's the truth. Those two identities cannot coexist. The hesitant self and the decisive self, they are opposites. One must vanish. If you are serious about growth, if you intend to become the fullest version of yourself, then you must retire the weaker version, the one who needs guarantees. I'm offering you a new lens, a new standard, a new mental blueprint. Live as though everything is always working out for you. Not because someone else said it would, but because when you choose to believe it, you become unstoppable. When you carry the assumption that success is inevitable, you begin walking with boldness. You speak more clearly. You navigate your life as a commander, not as a negotiator begging for favors. And the most powerful part? When you repeat this mindset not once but hundreds of times, your subconscious eventually accepts it as reality. Your fears begin to dissolve. Your presence becomes calm, focused, immovable. Because fear cannot survive in the same space where faith has taken root. If you genuinely believe that every event, even the ones you can't yet understand, are unfolding for your highest good, then fear no longer has a role to play. So take this seriously, not as a fleeting motivational wave, but as a deep mental reset. Speak this belief aloud. Let it travel into your nervous system like electricity. Because this is no longer about external motivation. It's a reprogramming of your mental DNA. You will not think, act, or live the same way again. Start with a single question. What if everything is already working perfectly in my favor? Not just the things that feel pleasant, not just the wins or validations, but the failures, the pauses, the rejections, the delays, the moments of silence and disorientation. What if they're all forming the exact version of you needed to step into the future you've been praying for? That shift in mindset is your rebirth. The truth is, most people don't live in the present moment. They live inside their heads, replaying negative forecasts of what could go wrong. They wake up with anxiety, subconsciously bracing for disaster. They don't greet the morning with gratitude or excitement, but with mental armor, preparing for imagined chaos. They don't speak to uplift, but to retell stories of betrayal, disappointment, and pain. They live as though life is a crumbling house, always seconds away from collapse, even when it's perfectly intact. And what happens next? Reality follows focus. The fear-based narratives they repeat become self-fulfilling prophecies, not because they're cursed, but because that's where their energy flows. That's the law of mental creation. Attention energizes, and energy manifests. But there's another way, a way that doesn't ask you to fake positivity, a way that doesn't demand perfection or denial. It begins with a simple yet revolutionary choice: to believe before you see. To believe before you see is not naive. It is the blueprint behind every significant invention, every transformation, every revolution. No bridge was ever built until it was first engineered in the imagination. Edison's light bulb existed in his mind long before it lit the world. Henry Ford didn't wait for an affordable car to exist. He assumed it already did and just needed to bring it into view. Faith is not a reaction to your circumstances. It's a direction you choose in advance. And that's where your transformation begins. When you understand that the subconscious mind never debates with you, it doesn't ask whether something is true. It simply absorbs whatever you repeat, especially when emotion is involved. Whether you're joking, venting, or just being realistic, your subconscious listens. It remembers. And then it quietly begins reconstructing your outer world to match that internal programming. Say, "I'm unlucky," often enough, and your mind accepts it. "It'll probably fail again. Nothing ever works out for me." Your subconscious responds with, "Understood." And suddenly, that becomes the filter through which you see your entire life. You start noticing obstacles, missing opportunities, and behaving like someone who is stuck. Not because you lack talent, but because you've stopped looking for anything better. But what if you change the script? What if every morning, despite your current struggles, you declared, "Everything is working in my favor," even when your bank account is empty, even after betrayal, even when the future is hidden in fog? You still move like the doors are opening. You still act like the path is clearing. You still speak with the calm certainty of someone who knows the ending is already written. It just hasn't arrived yet. That kind of assumption begins to rewire your mental world. You stop panicking in adversity. You stop begging for validation. You stop waiting for cheerleaders, because you've become your own leader. This isn't delusion. It's a new form of leadership, internal leadership, the kind that Edison had when he said, "I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." That's not just resilience. That's someone who assumed success is already mine. Time just hasn't caught up yet. And that is the difference between someone who gives up after 3 tries and someone who becomes a legend. One waits for proof, the other moves by choice. And it is that choice, not your conditions, that rewrites your life. That's also why the strongest individuals aren't those who have the most resources, but those who carry an unshakable mindset. Those who walk without applause, those who act without instant reward, those who see every challenge not as a block, but as a brick in the road. So stop asking, "What if it all falls apart?" And instead ask, "What if everything is already going right, and I just don't see it yet?" That's the first real shift, from fear to faith. Not blind positivity, but quiet conviction. A daily practice of trust. And if you do it long enough, something incredible happens. The world may not change overnight, but the way you see it does. And that change, that lens, is the beginning of everything. There is one principle, one internal decision that sets apart those who drift through life from those who redirect its current. It's not luck. It's not intelligence. It's not access or privilege. It's the boldness to believe without needing to see. That may sound simple, even obvious, but if you've ever stood at the edge of a dream with trembling knees and no certainty in sight, then you know it takes more than inspiration. It takes identity. Because to believe before you see doesn't mean whispering positive phrases in the mirror and hoping something sticks. It means walking, deciding, showing up, and acting every day with the posture of someone who already knows how the story ends. When you finally understand that your subconscious doesn't discriminate, it only absorbs, you begin to realize that your internal dialogue isn't just commentary, it's instruction. Every time you speak negatively about your life, even in jest, your subconscious hears a directive. Every word gets stored, cataloged, and eventually reproduced in the form of decisions, responses, and behaviors. And most people never realize that the voice guiding their life is not some external force. It's the echo of their own repeated phrases, internalized until they became law. That's why it's not just about changing your language, it's about changing the emotional energy behind it. You can't mumble affirmations and expect transformation. The subconscious doesn't respond to logic. It responds to intensity, to repetition, to emotion. Say I'm a failure with pain and enough frequency, and it will become your identity. But say I'm becoming a force with clarity, daily conviction, and fire in your belly, and that identity will eventually take over everything else. You can't just intellectually know this. You must emotionally live it. When you repeat a thought with emotion, you trigger neuroplasticity. Your brain literally begins rewiring itself. What once felt impossible becomes your baseline. That's why belief doesn't require proof. It requires training. Because belief is not discovered. Belief is constructed layer by layer, action by action, choice by choice. And when you begin to act as though your future already belongs to you, the world has no option but to recalibrate in response to that signal. It may not happen on your timeline. It may not happen in the way you expect, but it will happen. Because belief, once fused with behavior, becomes reality's blueprint. Look at the people you admire, not for their fame or popularity, but for their resilience. The ones who kept going long after applause faded, who kept building while others mocked, who planted when nothing grew. They didn't wait for the world to approve. They assumed the world would adjust. And it always does. Thomas Edison didn't need confirmation that his inventions would work. He just needed to show up to the next experiment. Over 10,000 failures, and still he moved forward, not because he was sure of the next result, but because he had already accepted the outcome in his mind. The light bulb wasn't just an invention, it was the physical result of thousands of invisible repetitions of belief. Henry Ford didn't ask for permission to make cars affordable. He simply acted as though it was already a fact. He didn't argue. He didn't pitch. He just walked with the air of a man who had already driven the car. And when you do that, when you behave as though your vision has already arrived, you start speaking, walking, and deciding with a frequency that reality cannot ignore. You become magnetic, not because of charisma, but because your energy is synchronized with a higher outcome that others can feel, even if they can't yet explain it. That's what makes the difference. Not brilliance, not circumstances, not timing, clarity, relentless, immovable clarity. One sentence that burns so fiercely inside you that it begins to light up every decision in its path. Not a vague wish list, not a dozen dreams in conflict, just one. The one sentence that makes your heart race, that clears out all the noise, that makes every excuse feel too small to hold on to. When you find that sentence, when you write it down and stare at it every morning, your priorities reorder themselves. Your distractions fade into irrelevance. You stop needing to compare yourself to others because you're finally running your own race. And from that place of clarity, a new kind of power emerges, a grounded focus. You stop absorbing every opinion, every criticism, every doubt, because you've finally chosen your mission. And when you live from that center, when your whole being orbits around one undeniable why, you become unstoppable not because the path is easy, but because you've removed every option to retreat. That's why you must burn the bridge back, not out of recklessness, but as a conscious strategy. Because so long as the exit door remains open, even just in your mind, you will hesitate, you'll second guess, you'll leave a piece of yourself in the old world, and you cannot become someone new while keeping an escape route to who you used to be. Burn the bridge back. Eliminate the words, "if it doesn't work." Delete the backup plans that are just illusions in disguise. Declare, "There is no other option. I'm becoming this. I've decided." It is that decision, the irreversible one, that opens a deeper reservoir of strength within you. The moment you eliminate the option of retreat, your instincts sharpen, your energy focuses, your creativity heightens. Because now your mind is no longer wasting energy debating, only building. The decision is already made. Forward is the only direction left. That level of resolve is the turning point. Most people flirt with their goals. They visit their dreams on weekends. They write plans in notebooks and wait for motivation to strike. But those who change history, those who transform their lives, don't wait. They decide. They step forward without knowing how the whole staircase will appear. They say yes before the plan is finished. They move as though something greater is already in motion. And because of that, doors open. Not magically, but in response to their persistence. Because the universe responds to clarity. It aligns with action. It meets decision with momentum. But only when you go all in. Only when you stop asking for guarantees. Only when you stop living halfway. So the question is, what have you not yet burned? What backup path have you preserved out of fear? What outdated identity are you still carrying in case this new one doesn't work out? Burn it. Not with anger, but with gratitude. Let it go. Release it fully. And in that release, you'll discover something powerful. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from safety, but the kind that emerges from absolute commitment. The kind of peace that says, I'm no longer entertaining doubt. I'm here now, all in, no retreat. From that moment forward, every step becomes easier, not because the work is lighter, but because your focus is sharper. You are no longer divided. You've stopped negotiating with yourself. And that internal alignment becomes your greatest source of energy. But even with the right belief, the right clarity, and the right decision, there is one more factor that determines how far you'll go. Your environment. Not just your physical surroundings, but your mental environment. The people, conversations, and energies you allow into your inner space. You can be the most driven person in the world, but if you are surrounded by mediocrity, by doubt, by people who shrink in the face of pressure, your fire will dim. Slowly, silently, almost without you noticing. Because no mind exists in isolation. You're not just the product of your habits, you're the average of your 5 closest mental influences. And that's why every great visionary in history built a circle of aligned minds. Napoleon Hill called it the mastermind, a collective of individuals dedicated to sharpening each other's thinking, raising each other's standards, and protecting the shared flame of belief when storms came. You don't need a large circle, you just need the right one. Even one aligned mind can shift everything. One person who challenges you with purpose, one voice that reminds you of who you're becoming, one presence that makes your excuses feel too small. If you don't have that yet, build it. Start by becoming it. Raise your own standards so high that those with lesser ones fall away. Not by force, but by contrast. Speak with such clarity and depth that only those walking in truth can keep pace. And if no one joins you at first, keep walking. The right ones will find you, not by chance, but by resonance. Because energy doesn't lie. The frequency you operate at determines who enters your life. So operate at the frequency of your future, not your fears. Understand this. Every conversation is a download. Every word you hear programs your subconscious. If your daily environment is filled with doubt, complaint, sarcasm, and scarcity, then even your strongest belief will begin to erode. Not because it's weak, but because it's outnumbered. That's why you must fiercely protect your mental space. Choose your conversations like you choose your food. Feed yourself ideas, energy, and people who remind you of what's possible, not what's popular. And when you do, you'll notice something subtle but profound. Your thoughts will elevate, your actions will align, and your results will begin to multiply. Not because you're doing more, but because you're doing what matters most, consistently with conviction, surrounded by clarity. This is the difference between those who talk about success and those who embody it. The latter have built not just a mindset, but a mental ecosystem. A space where belief is not just protected, it is cultivated. Where discipline is not just practiced, it is normalized. Where excuses are not debated, they are dissolved. You don't stumble into that kind of environment, you create it. And it starts with one vow. I will no longer accept thinking that pulls me backward. I will no longer entertain conversations that shrink my identity. I will no longer sit at tables where greatness is mocked and mediocrity is praised. From now on, I will think, speak, act, and associate in alignment with the future I have chosen. Not out of arrogance, but out of loyalty to my vision. Belief is not a gift handed down from the heavens. It is not a personality trait, nor is it something you're born with or without. Belief is a structure, brick by brick, repetition by repetition, forged through daily action and emotional conviction. It is not discovered in a single breakthrough or awakened by a fleeting moment of inspiration. True belief, the kind that moves mountains and rewrites legacies, is a muscle, trained, tested, and tempered by the fires of discipline. And the formula for building it is not mystical, it is simple and repeatable. Action, repetition, and emotion. These three form a cycle so powerful that once activated, it cannot help but reprogram your subconscious, which in turn reprograms your decisions, behaviors, and ultimately your destiny. Action without repetition is just a burst. Repetition without emotion is mechanical. But when all three are present, you begin engraving a new operating system deep into your nervous system, one that begins to overwrite the old patterns of fear, doubt, and resignation that you've unknowingly been living by for years. The issue is, most people live on autopilot, unaware of what they're feeding their mind every single day. They repeat the wrong affirmations. They say, I'm always tired. I can't win. I'm not good enough. Without realizing that these phrases aren't harmless. They're codes. Codes that the subconscious doesn't question, doesn't analyze, doesn't filter. It simply absorbs. And once absorbed, those beliefs become reference points for everything you experience. You may think it's just a bad mood, but your subconscious has already begun shaping your behavior to match the limits you've spoken. That's why the work isn't just about saying new things. It's about saying them with full presence, with emotional intensity, with physical alignment. If you say, I act with purpose, but you say it slouched, with low energy and doubt in your voice, it won't register. But if you say it upright, with clarity in your eyes, motion in your body, and certainty in your tone, your subconscious has no choice. It accepts that command as real and begins shifting your entire energetic field to match. You must understand, every small action is either building belief or breaking it. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, whether it's waking up on time, finishing the workout, or speaking with courage, you are reinforcing inner trust. You're teaching your mind, I follow through. And every time you back away, compromise, or delay what you said mattered, you're not just losing time. You're eroding the foundation of your self-belief. That's why it's not the big wins that matter most in the beginning. It's the micro movements, the subtle acts of integrity, the quiet moments where no one else is watching, but you choose to live aligned anyway. That's how belief becomes automatic. Not because you hope for it, but because you practice being it. At some point, the repetition becomes so deeply embedded that you no longer have to remind yourself. You simply live it. Your subconscious takes over, and you start moving through life with a new default. I trust myself. I follow through. I'm becoming exactly who I chose to be. But here's where most people sabotage themselves. They wait for external validation before they lock in internal belief. They wait to see results before acting like they belong at the table. They need applause, approval, or success before they walk with conviction. But belief that needs evidence is the weakest kind. Because what happens when the applause fades? What happens when the result doesn't come quickly? What happens when the world stays silent? If your belief is built on proof, you will crumble in uncertainty. But if it's built on repetition, conviction, and chosen identity, you will thrive because your foundation is unshakable. You will persist in silence, you will continue in darkness, and you will become someone whose presence radiates purpose even before results arrive. That is the kind of belief that creates empires, that alters destinies, that transforms ordinary people into forces of nature. And once that belief becomes your new standard, it affects everything, especially how you show up in the world. Because at some point, success is no longer about what you do. It's about who you are. It's about your character, your energy, your magnetism. And that doesn't come from effort alone. It comes from depth. In a world saturated with noise, with people posturing, performing, and trying to be seen, the rarest trait is authenticity. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that calms the room simply by entering. You know this type of presence. The person who walks in with stillness, not because they're trying to impress, but because they've done the inner work. The person who listens more than they speak, who lifts the energy around them without needing to be loud. The person who holds eye contact, follows through on their word, and doesn't flinch when challenged. Not because they're aggressive, but because they're rooted. That is the mark of character. And character is not something you perform. It's something you live quietly, daily, when no one is grading you. Look at the greatest leaders across time. Not the ones with the flashiest resumes or the biggest followings, but the ones who left an imprint. Andrew Carnegie wasn't known for shouting his ideas. He was known for empowering others, for remembering names, for listening with full attention. Charles M. Schwab wasn't the most technically gifted, but he was remembered for his presence, his ability to ease tension with a word, to lead through inspiration, to walk with a steadiness that made people feel safe. These men didn't build their legacies by chance. They built them through character, through repetition, through a commitment to invisible standards. And you can too. Not by imitating their strategies, but by cultivating the same depth, by choosing every day to speak with care, to move with intention, to live with conviction, not as a performance, but as a practice. Because the world doesn't remember what you wore or how you sounded. The world remembers how you made it feel, and character leaves a resonance that no applause can replicate. So if you want to not just rise quickly, but rise meaningfully, then begin with how you enter every space. Ask yourself, am I bringing stillness or seeking attention? Am I lifting others or proving myself? Am I aligning with my highest values even when it's hard? The smallest details reveal your character. How you speak to the server, how you treat the intern, how you handle disagreement, how you speak about someone not in the room. These things matter more than you think. Because in the end, your character becomes your brand, not your resume, not your Instagram, not your accolades, but the energy you leave behind. If you want to build something lasting, build that. Build a presence that doesn't need explanation, a voice that doesn't need to shout, a way of living that people remember even after you've left the room. Because in a world full of noise, the person who lives with quiet power will always be the one others look to, even if they don't say it aloud. And if you've made it to this point, if you've walked through this journey of thought, of inner alignment, of redefining belief, identity, and environment, then you already know what the next step is. It's not to wait until everything is perfect. It's not to reread these ideas until you feel ready. It's to begin. Now, tomorrow morning, with presence, with weight, with reverence, step into the day not as a passive participant, but as someone who knows they are shaping the future with every action, every word, every thought. Don't wait to be noticed. Don't wait for permission. Live as though your standard has already been raised, and watch how the world rearranges itself in response. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to compete to be seen. You just need to walk like someone who has already decided what kind of life they're going to build. And from that place, you become magnetic, not because of what you say, but because of what you embody. Let this be your vow, not to seek motivation, but to live as the source of it. Not to chase success, but to create value so deep it cannot be ignored. Not to perform for others, but to master the art of alignment so fully that you no longer require external applause to validate your internal truth. Begin building not just habits, but a presence. Not just results, but a resonance. Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't reward effort, it rewards transformation. The ones who rise are not the ones who do the most, but the ones who become the clearest, the most aligned, the most committed to a standard no one can see but everyone can feel. Let that be you.